What would you do if, all of a sudden, everything you had planned for your life fell apart? One day you have a home, a relationship, and security. The next you're alone, lost, and unsure of what to do next. Some people are able to start over easily. Others simply get lost along the way. But what happens when fate places an unexpected opportunity in front of you? Would you take the risk or let fear win? If losing everything is hard enough, imagine facing it while pregnant and with no one to help. How do you carry on when all the doors seem closed? The answer is simple. You carry on because there is no other choice. Desperation forces us to make decisions that we would never consider in normal times. And if an opportunity arises, even if it seems strange, you grab it with all your might. The fear of failure cannot be greater than the need to survive. The rain fell heavily on the gray morning as Emma Carter stared at the pregnancy test in her hands. 3 months. Her racing heart felt like it was about to leap out of her chest. The small apartment she had once shared with Ryan, the man who had sworn to be by her side, was now nothing more than an empty, suffocating space. His cold words still echoed in her mind. "I'm not ready to be a father." And with that he was gone. Without a backward glance, Emma had spent the last few days staring at her rapidly dwindling bank balance. No job, no support, and now carrying a life inside her. How was she going to move on? That was when her eyes fell on the crumpled newspaper on the table. An ad circled in red pen. Caregiver wanted for young woman with special needs, housing included, great pay. Emma hesitated. Such a job would demand a lot from her. But what else could she do? Her baby needed her, and in that moment she understood. It was no longer about what she wanted, but about what she had to do to survive. With a deep sigh, she picked up the phone and dialed the number. On the other end of the line, a firm voice answered. "Mr. Walker will see you tomorrow. Be at the mansion by 10 a.m. The next morning, Emma arrived at a massive wrought iron gate. The Walker mansion loomed large on the other side, its elegant facade and its large dark windows watching her silently. Her stomach knotted. Her navy blue dress, the most formal she owned, seemed too simple for such a place. With cold hands, she clutched the strap of her purse and announced her arrival over the intercom. "Emma Carter, I came for the announcement." After a brief silence, the metallic sound of the gate opening echoed through the air. She walked inside, walking slowly along the stone path lined with tall cypress trees. With each step, she felt as if she were about to cross an invisible threshold. A woman with gray hair pulled back into a severe bun was waiting for her at the front door. Her appraising gaze swept Emma from head to toe. "Follow me. Mr. Walker is expecting you." Her voice was cold, impersonal. Emma swallowed hard and followed the woman into the enormous entrance hall. The marble floor shone so brightly that it reflected her silhouette. The walls were adorned with antique paintings and furniture that looked worth more than anything she had ever owned. The space exuded wealth, but also loneliness. How could someone live in a place so beautiful and yet so empty? As she entered the office, Emma saw a man sitting behind a dark wood desk. Ethan Walker. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an intense gaze. His angular face was marked by a perfectly trimmed beard. He looked up from the papers in front of him and gestured for her to sit down. "Your resume is interesting." His voice was low and controlled. "You have experience with children and adolescents, but you've never worked in a private home. What made you interested in the position?" Emma knew this was the deciding question. What should she say? The truth? "I need this job." She opted for honesty. "I'm pregnant." A heavy silence hung over the room. Emma felt her heart race. Had she just ruined everything? No employer would accept someone in that condition. But to her surprise, Ethan didn't react at all. He just stared at her for a long moment, his dark eyes assessing every detail of her. Is the child's father present? The question took her by surprise. No. His voice sounded firmer than she expected. "I take full responsibility." Ethan was silent for a few more seconds before answering. The job requires total dedication. You will live in the house, taking care of my son. The salary will be enough to ensure that you have stability when the baby is born. Can you start today? Emma didn't know how to react right away. Was that a yes? There were no more questions, no hesitation. Just a quick, matter-of-fact decision. She blinked, trying to process what had just happened. Yes, I can start today. Ethan just nodded, as if he had expected this answer. Carmen, take Miss Carter to her quarters and then introduce her to Noah. Emma stood up slowly, still trying to sort out what she was feeling. Relief, fear, a little of both. It was all happening too fast. But deep down, she knew. There was no time to hesitate. Carmen led her down a long hallway to a far wing of the mansion. Your room is here. The door opened to a surprisingly cozy room. It wasn't overly luxurious, but it was larger than any place she'd ever lived. A large bed, a spacious closet, and a window overlooking a garden of ancient trees. Emma dropped her bag on the bed and took a deep breath. She had done it. For now, at least, she had a roof over her head and a chance to start over. But the housekeeper's cold voice brought her back to reality. Mr. Walker wants you to meet the boy now. Don't be late. They walked down a second hallway until they reached the east wing of the mansion. Carmen stopped in front of a door and knocked twice before opening it. Noah, this is your new caretaker. Emma held her breath as she walked in. The first thing she noticed were the huge computer monitors and video game posters scattered around the room. Then she saw him. Noah Walker sat in a wheelchair near the window, the late afternoon light catching his tousled dark hair. His gaze was sharp, wary. He assessed her for a few seconds before saying bluntly, "How long are you going to last?" Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" Noah shrugged and swiveled his chair slightly. The last one stayed for 2 weeks. The one before that, 3 days. And before that. He waved his hand vaguely. People give up. Emma crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. And you want me to give up too? Noah stared at her for a few more seconds before letting out a dry laugh. It doesn't matter what I want. You're going to give up anyway. Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. What had this boy been through to make him so convinced that everyone would abandon him? Emma held Noah's gaze for a few seconds before answering. I guess you're used to betting against people. Huh? The boy arched an eyebrow, surprised that she wasn't intimidated. It's not a bet, it's a fact. Emma crossed her arms and leaned forward slightly. Then let's make a deal. You think I won't last? Give me 3 days. If after that you still want me gone, I will. Noah snorted, shaking his head. 3 days, seriously? He eyed her suspiciously, but deep down he seemed intrigued. Okay, 3 days. That night, as she unpacked her suitcase in her new room, Emma felt a new weight on her chest. She had gotten the job. But that was just the beginning. Noah clearly didn't trust her, and Ethan, well, he seemed as closed off as the mansion itself. Emma knew she couldn't fail, not now. She sat up in bed and ran a gentle hand over her still discreet belly. It'll work out. But would it? The fear of rejection grew inside her. What would she do if Noah asked her to leave? What if Ethan decided she wasn't worth keeping? The next 3 days were a test of patience. Noah was not making things easy. He ignored Emma whenever possible, refused to cooperate with physical therapy, and seemed determined to push her away. At breakfast, he would accidentally spill juice on the table. At lunch, he would push his plate away without even trying it. And when Emma tried to make conversation, her responses were short and cold. But Emma stood her ground. She didn't show frustration. She didn't back down. And to every little provocation, she responded with a smile and a calm demeanor. On the 4th day, something unexpected happened. Emma walked into Noah's room and found him engrossed in his computer. He didn't even look at her as he asked, "Have you thought of a name yet?" Emma blinked, confused. What? Noah rolled his eyes. For your baby, have you picked a name yet? Emma smiled softly, feeling for the first time a small crack appear in the wall he had built around himself. Not yet, but I welcome suggestions. Noah was silent for a moment, as if pondering something. Ethan Jr. would be too cheesy. Emma laughed, and for a second she swore she saw the ghost of a smile on his face. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to accept her. That afternoon, as she accompanied Noah to his physical therapy session, Emma noticed something she had previously overlooked. Ethan Walker was always distant. He would follow his son's progress from afar, but he would never actively participate. Even when the physical therapist would comment on small improvements, Ethan would just nod and leave the room before the conversation could continue. Emma couldn't help but wonder, was he really that busy, or was he simply avoiding dealing with Noah? Later, as she helped Noah back to his room, the boy sighed and said bluntly, "He doesn't even seem to care." Emma looked at him, surprised by his bluntness. "Your dad?" Noah nodded, leaning his head back in the chair. "Before the accident, he was different. But now, I think he sees me as a reminder of what happened." Emma felt a tightness in her chest. The weight of those words was enormous. What exactly had happened? Instead of pressing the issue, Emma decided to change her approach. "So, what do you think he should do?" Noah shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe act like I'm still his son?" The comment was casual, but Emma sensed the pain hidden behind it. Didn't Ethan realize how much Noah craved her attention? She didn't know the whole story, but she was sure of one thing. Noah didn't need pity. He needed someone to believe in him. Later, as Emma walked down the main hallway, she saw Ethan standing in front of the mansion's large fireplace, staring at an old family photo. It was the first time she had seen him without that rigid, unwavering posture. For a moment, he looked like a man carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. Emma hesitated, then said softly, "He misses you, you know." Ethan turned slowly, his dark eyes studying her warily. "What are you talking about?" Emma crossed her arms. "Noah, he thinks you don't care anymore." Ethan stared at Emma for a few seconds, as if he were considering whether or not it was worth continuing this conversation. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh and looked back at the photo. "You don't understand." His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I failed him." Emma frowned, waiting for him to continue, but Ethan just closed his eyes for a moment before adding, "If I had been more attentive that day, none of this would have happened." Emma felt the weight of those words. So that was it. Guilt. Ethan wasn't being distant because he didn't care about Noah. He was distancing himself because he believed he'd failed as a father. But did Noah know that? Or did he just see his father's coldness, not the broken man behind that rigid facade? Emma took a deep breath before answering. "If you think you've failed, then why don't you try to fix it?" Ethan let out a humorless laugh. "Do you think it's that simple?" "I didn't say it was simple." Emma stepped forward, her voice firm. "But Noah needs you, and honestly, I think you need him too." Ethan was silent, his jaw clenched. Emma wasn't sure if her words had had any effect, but she noticed that for once, he didn't end the conversation abruptly. That was progress. Maybe he was starting to listen. The next morning, something surprising happened. Noah and Emma were out in the garden, enjoying the soft autumn sunshine, when Ethan showed up. He never came here. Noah immediately tensed, his body stiffening in his chair. But, to Emma's surprise, Ethan simply walked over and said, "How's the workout going?" Noah took a second to answer, clearly suspicious. "Fine." Ethan nodded, and before he walked away, he added, "I want to watch you practice tomorrow." Noah frowned. "Watch?" Ethan held his son's gaze. "Yes, I want to be there." Noah was silent for a moment, clearly processing his father's words. Ethan had never shown any direct interest in training before. Emma watched from the corner of her eye, waiting for a response. Finally, Noah gave a slight nod and murmured, "Okay." It wasn't enthusiasm, but it wasn't rejection either. For someone who had expected nothing but indifference from his father, this simple acceptance was a huge step forward. The next morning, when Emma walked into the physical therapy room, she found Ethan already there, arms crossed, watching intently as the physical therapist prepared Noah for the exercises. The room was filled with a quiet tension. Noah avoided looking directly at his father, and Ethan looked uncomfortable, as if he wasn't sure what his role was there. But as the exercises progressed, something unexpected happened. Noah was pushing himself harder than ever. His hands shook slightly as he held on to the parallel bars, but he didn't complain. He didn't ask to stop. Ethan could tell. With each small accomplishment, Emma noticed his gaze softening. When Noah managed to stay on his feet for longer than usual, Ethan took a step forward. "Good job, son." His voice was firm, but not distant. Noah glanced at him quickly as if trying to gauge the sincerity of his words. Something changed in his expression. Maybe surprise, maybe hope. But before he could say anything, Ethan had already stepped back, crossing his arms again. Old habits died hard. Later that day, Emma found Noah in his room, playing on the computer, but clearly distracted. He was thinking about what had happened earlier. Sitting down in the chair next to her, Emma said casually, "So, I guess someone got a surprise today." Noah didn't look up from the screen, but he replied, "He doesn't have to pretend." Emma smiled slightly. "Maybe he's not pretending." Noah was silent for a few seconds before muttering, "Let's see how long this lasts." The following days were marked by a subtle but noticeable change. Ethan began to show up more often. Sometimes he would just watch Noah train without saying anything. Other times, he would ask the physical therapist questions, showing a genuine interest in his son's progress. Noah, on the other hand, still maintained his distrust. It was as if he was expecting his father to withdraw again at any moment. But despite this, Emma noticed something new. He no longer completely rejected Ethan's presence. One night, while Emma was reviewing some paperwork about Noah's physical therapy, she heard a soft knock on the door. When she opened it, she found Ethan standing there, hands in his pockets, looking hesitant. It wasn't an expression that suited him. "Can I come in?" Emma nodded, surprised. He stepped inside and was silent for a moment before finally saying, "Thank you." Emma frowned. "For what?" Ethan looked away toward the window. "For not giving up on Noah. For staying." Emma took a deep breath before answering. "I couldn't leave. He needed someone to believe in him." Ethan turned to face her, his gaze intense. "I should have been that person too." It was the first time Emma had seen real vulnerability in his expression. He knew he had failed, and now he seemed ready to make it right. But before the conversation could go any further, a noise in the hallway made them turn. Noah was there, standing in the doorway. He had heard everything. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Noah sighed and crossed his arms. "It's good to know you two are talking about me." There was irony in his voice, but Emma could tell there was no anger there. Ethan stared at him for a moment before saying firmly, "I'm not talking about you, Noah. I'm talking to myself." Noah blinked in surprise. He didn't seem to know how to respond to that, but instead of ducking out of the conversation like he normally would, he just nodded slightly before walking away down the hall. Maybe for once he was willing to listen. The next morning, Emma noticed something different about Noah's routine. He was more focused on his exercises, more willing to work hard. He wasn't grumbling like he usually did or pretending to be disinterested. Maybe overhearing their conversation the night before had planted something inside him, a small seed of hope, even if he wouldn't admit it. When he could hold his own weight for a few seconds without support, he glanced discreetly at the door, as if expecting Ethan to be there to see. But to his apparent disappointment, his father didn't show up. Noah let out a frustrated sigh and muttered to Emma, "I knew he wouldn't keep coming." Emma crossed her arms and replied calmly, "Or maybe he just needs to know that you want him to come." Noah glanced at her suspiciously. And why would I do that? Emma shrugged. Because you care, even if you pretend you don't. The boy fell silent, biting the corner of his cheek as if processing her words. Then, without looking at her, he muttered, "Do you think if I ask him, he'll come?" Later, Emma found Ethan in his office, as usual, buried in piles of paperwork. She knew he used work as a shield to avoid certain emotions. Leaning against the door frame, he crossed his arms and said, "Noah asked about you today." Ethan looked up immediately, and Emma could see the surprise in his eyes. "He asked?" She nodded. "He didn't say it outright, but yes, he wants you to be there." Ethan was silent for a long moment, then closed his eyes for a second as if processing something. When he opened them again, there was a different determination there. "Then I will be." That afternoon, when Noah began his physical therapy, Emma noticed his expression change when he saw Ethan standing in the doorway. The boy didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. During the exercises, Ethan had been silent, but this time, he was more present. When Noah managed to stand for a few seconds, Ethan stepped forward and said with a lightness that surprised everyone, "I think you won me a bet." Noah arched an eyebrow. "Bet?" Ethan shrugged. "I didn't think you could balance for that long. You proved me wrong." For the first time, Noah actually laughed. It was the first time in a long time that the two of them interacted without weight, without pain, just as father and son. Over the next few days, something remarkable happened. Ethan started coming to Noah's physical therapy sessions regularly. At first, he just watched, keeping his distance, as if he was still trying out his own role in the dynamic. But over time, he began to get closer. He asked questions, suggested small challenges for his son, and sometimes even helped with the exercises, holding Noah for support when needed. Emma watched this happen and felt something change in the house. For the first time, the Walkers felt like a family trying to rebuild themselves. One evening after dinner, Emma was out in the garden, enjoying the cool breeze when Ethan appeared. He was different, less tense, more human. "I didn't thank you properly." His voice was low, almost hesitant. Emma frowned. "For what?" Ethan sighed and looked up at the sky for a moment before answering. "For believing in Noah when I didn't believe in myself." There was something raw in that confession, something Emma knew was not easy for him to say. "I only did what anyone should have done." Ethan stared at her intently. "No, Emma, you did more." For a moment the two of them were silent. The night was still, and the only sound was the wind rustling the leaves in the trees. "I know I have no right to ask this, but could you help me keep getting better?" Emma blinked in surprise. Ethan Walker was asking for help? The man who always seemed to have everything under control was now admitting that he needed her? She hadn't expected this, but deep down she felt that it was important. "Of course." His answer was simple, but it carried a lot of meaning. The next morning, when she walked into Noah's room to help him get ready for another day of practice, she found him fiddling with an old notebook. He seemed lost in thought. Emma walked over and asked curiously, "What are you reading?" Noah looked at her and hesitated for a second before turning the notebook toward her. It was an old journal. "My mother's." Emma was silent, respecting the moment. "I've never read it before, but I think now I want to remember her." Her tone was hesitant, but Emma understood. Perhaps the reconnection with his father was allowing Noah to cope with the loss of his mother in a different way. Over the next few days, Noah spent more time with his mother's diary. It was as if each page he read was a piece of her that he was reclaiming. Emma could tell that he would become pensive after reading, but he seemed calmer, more receptive. One rainy afternoon, as they were sorting through some books on the bookshelf in their bedroom, Noah picked up the diary and said, barely looking at Emma, "She wrote about me all the time." Emma smiled softly. "That doesn't surprise you, does it? You were her world." Noah hesitated, turning a page carefully. She said my father and I were alike. Emma sat down next to him, waiting for him to continue. Noah sighed and stared at the open page. She thought we were stubborn, that we hid our feelings because we didn't want to seem weak. He laughed humorlessly. Maybe she was right. Emma studied him for a moment before replying, "Maybe your father is trying to change that now too." Noah didn't answer right away. He just closed the diary slowly and muttered, "Yeah, maybe." That night at dinner, Emma noticed that Noah was looking at his father differently. It wasn't just distrust anymore. There was something more there. The meal was proceeding smoothly, and in the middle of a casual conversation, Noah did something unexpected. "Dad, can I show you something later?" Ethan, who was taking a sip of wine, paused for a second before nodding. "Sure." Emma was surprised. For the first time, Noah was allowing his father to enter his world. After dinner, Ethan followed Noah to his room. Emma didn't want to interfere, but stood in the doorway, watching discreetly. Noah picked up the diary and handed it to Ethan. "It's Mom's." Ethan hesitated before taking it, his eyes fixed on the worn cover. He ran his fingers over his wife's name engraved there, and for a moment he seemed unable to say anything. Noah waited in silence. It was a fragile moment, and then Ethan took a deep breath and said, "Thank you for showing me this, son." For the first time, Noah smiled at his father. The next morning, Emma noticed something had changed. There was a new kind of lightness in Noah's eyes. He didn't talk about what had happened the night before, but Emma knew that this moment with his father had been significant. For perhaps the first time in a long time, Noah felt like he wasn't alone anymore. When they started physical therapy, Emma noticed that he was more determined than ever. His movements were firmer, his focus more intense. The physical therapist noticed it too. "Someone with extra energy today, huh?" Noah just smiled, a rare thing, coming from him. At the end of the session, Ethan appeared. He didn't just stand there and watch. He walked up to Noah and said matter-of-factly, "Do you need help getting back to your room?" Noah hesitated for a moment, then said, "I'll be there." Ethan picked up the wheelchair and began pushing it down the hallway. Emma followed close behind, noticing that Noah didn't seem uncomfortable with it. It was a small gesture, but it carried a huge meaning. Something that had once seemed impossible was now happening naturally. Later, as they stood in the garden, Noah looked at Emma and asked bluntly, "What's going to happen to you after the baby is born?" Emma blinked, a little taken aback. "What do you mean?" Noah shrugged. "Well, you got a job here, but what about after that? Are you going to stay?" Emma hadn't thought about it much. She had found a home here, but she knew nothing was permanent. Before she could answer, Noah added, "If it's up to me, you'll stay." Emma smiled softly. "I like it here, Noah, but I don't know what the future holds." Noah thought for a moment before murmuring, "Well, I just don't want you to disappear like everyone else." Emma felt a tightness in her chest. He was still afraid of being abandoned. Gently, she leaned closer and said, "I'm not going anywhere. You can always count on me." Noah looked at her for a second and then nodded. Maybe for the first time, he actually believed her. Over the next few days, the routine at the Walker mansion changed. The dynamic between Noah and Ethan had changed. Noah still maintained his independent stance, but he no longer pushed his father away. Ethan, in turn, seemed genuinely committed to reconnecting with his son. When Noah made progress in his exercises, he congratulated him. When the boy had a tough day, he was simply there. The invisible barrier between them was slowly fading. Emma watched this transformation closely, feeling part of it. But at the same time, a sense of unease grew inside her. Noah had asked about the future, and that kept echoing in her mind. Could she really stay here after her baby was born? Ethan was grateful for what she had done, but did that mean there was a permanent place for her here? One quiet night, as Emma was organizing some notes about Noah's exercises, a soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Ethan. He sounded hesitant, like he wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. "Can I come in?" Emma nodded, and he approached slowly. "Noah said something to me today." The seriousness in his voice made Emma sit up straighter, attentive. "He asked if you were going to leave after the baby was born." Emma felt her heart race slightly. "What did you say?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "That I didn't know." He finally looked her in the eyes. "But I know what I want." The air seemed to thicken in the room. "And what do you want, Ethan?" Emma's question came in a calm tone, but loaded with meaning. He held her gaze for a moment before finally saying, "For you to stay." Emma felt a shiver run down her spine at the words. "That you stay." Simple, direct, but carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. "Ethan," she began, but wasn't sure how to continue. What did that mean? Did he want her to stay for Noah, for the baby, for him? Ethan seemed to sense her hesitation and stepped forward, his expression more serious than ever. "You brought something into this house that I thought was lost forever." Emma felt her breath quicken. "What do you mean?" Ethan kept his gaze fixed on her, as if gathering the courage to say something he'd never admitted before. "Peace, life, hope." He ran a hand over his face, looking weary. "For years, I've locked myself away inside this house. Inside myself. I no longer saw any purpose beyond work. But you..." He hesitated, then added in a lower tone, "You made me want to see beyond that." The silence that followed was heavy, full of unspoken meaning. Emma felt her heart pound. What would she do now? Ethan Walker was not a man who showed his feelings easily, and yet here he was, vulnerable, admitting that she had changed something inside him. But what about her? What did she feel? Emma knew that Ethan had become an essential presence in her life. She trusted him, but allowing herself to feel anything beyond that was a risk. She swallowed hard and looked away for a moment. "Ethan, Before she could finish, a voice cut through the silence. "Dad?" They both turned to see Noah standing in the doorway, watching them with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Emma stepped away from Ethan a little, trying to regain her composure. Ethan, in turn, took a deep breath and turned fully to his son. "What's wrong, Noah?" The boy hesitated for a moment before saying, almost shyly, "Can we talk?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Sure." He glanced at Emma quickly before following Noah down the hall. Emma stayed behind, watching the two disappear down the hall, feeling a mix of emotions she couldn't name. What did Noah want to talk about? Was it about what he had just witnessed, or maybe something deeper? She didn't know, but one thing was certain. Something was changing inside that house. Half an hour later, Ethan returned. His expression was different. He didn't look tense or lost in his own thoughts like he usually did after difficult conversations with Noah. Instead, he looked relieved. Emma got up from the couch and crossed her arms, waiting for him to speak. "He wanted to show me more pages from his mother's diary." Ethan's voice was calm, almost soothing. "He said he wanted me to know how she saw him, how she saw us." Emma felt a lump in her throat. "That's a big deal for Noah." Ethan nodded. "I know, and it made me realize something." He approached slowly, as if choosing each word carefully. "I spent so long thinking it was too late to be a good father that I never really tried." His eyes met hers. "But now I see I still have a chance." Emma smiled, lightly. "And what are you going to do with that chance?" Ethan took a deep breath and then said something that took Emma by surprise. "I'll fight for him, and for you." The silence that followed was filled with tension. Emma wasn't sure if this was the right time to talk about this, but before she could decide, Ethan was already continuing. "I know I need to give Noah time, but I also need to be honest with how I feel. You brought back something I thought I would never have again, Emma." He hesitated for a second before adding, "And I don't want to lose you." Emma felt the impact of those words like a shock. Ethan Walker was pouring his heart out to her, A man who had spent years trapped in his own pain was now standing there, telling her in no uncertain terms that he didn't want to lose her. She knew she couldn't ignore what she was feeling, but at the same time, the fear was real. "Ethan," she began, choosing her words carefully. "This is all happening so fast. I need time to figure out what I really want." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I understand." But his tone wasn't resigned, but rather certain. "I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Emma realized that, unlike everything she had experienced in the past, he wasn't demanding anything from her. He wasn't pressuring her. He was just being honest. For the first time in a long time, she felt like someone truly wanted to be by her side, without conditions. That night, Emma had trouble sleeping. What did she want? Everything had changed so quickly in the past few months that she barely had time to process it. She had come to this house wanting only a job. Now she had something much more valuable. A real connection with Noah, a growing feeling for Ethan, and a baby on the way. But allowing herself to accept all this also meant taking another risk. What if it went wrong? What if everything fell apart like before? The next morning, when she went down to breakfast, she found Noah and Ethan already sitting at the table. It was a different scene from what she was used to. Noah seemed relaxed, and Ethan spoke to him in a natural way, without the constant tension that always hung in the air. When Noah noticed Emma, he simply said with a slight smile, "I've decided I'm going to try to give my father a chance." Emma felt a warmth in her chest. Noah was finally letting Ethan in. Emma smiled at Noah's words. "I'm glad about that." Noah shrugged, trying to look indifferent. But Emma noticed a different light in his eyes. He didn't want to admit it, but this meant a lot to him. Ethan, in turn, just nodded and continued drinking his coffee. But Emma saw that he was holding back a small smile. It was a small step, but significant. As breakfast progressed, Noah broke the silence in an unexpected way. "What about you, Emma? Are you staying?" The question took Emma by surprise. Ethan looked up from his newspaper, waiting for her answer. Emma felt butterflies in her stomach. The truth was, she wasn't sure yet. She wanted to stay, of course. But what if everything fell apart? What if it wasn't what was best for her or the baby? With a sigh, she answered honestly, "I'm still thinking about it." Noah frowned, looking dissatisfied with her answer. "What do you have to think about? This is your home now." Emma felt her heart race. This was what she had been dreading hearing, because somehow she already felt like she was part of this family. But admitting it meant letting down her defenses. It meant accepting that she needed them too. Ethan remained silent, respecting her space, but his eyes said it all. He wanted her to stay, but he wouldn't pressure her. That afternoon, Emma found herself pacing the garden, thinking. She already had her answer. She always had. She just needed to find the courage to accept it. When she returned to the house, she found Noah in the living room, playing with his video game, and Ethan sorting through some papers in his office. Taking a deep breath, she walked into the room and stopped in front of him. "I've made my decision." Ethan looked up, his expression wary. Emma gave him a small smile before saying, "I'm staying." For a moment, Ethan just stared at her, as if to make sure he'd heard her correctly. "Are you sure?" His voice was calm, but it held a hint of vulnerability that Emma had never heard before. She nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I am. This is where I belong." For the first time since she'd arrived in this house, she felt like she didn't need to run anymore, that she didn't need to fear the future. She belonged here. Ethan let out a soft sigh, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I'm glad about that." He hesitated for a second before adding, "Very glad." Emma felt a warmth in her chest. Ethan Walker, always so restrained, now let his relief and joy show. He didn't try to hide the small smile that formed on his lips, and Emma realized that this moment was greater than any word spoken. When Noah heard the decision, his reaction was immediate. I knew it. He tried to sound nonchalant, but the sparkle in his eyes betrayed his true emotion. I told you this place was already yours. Emma laughed, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. Noah was learning to trust. Ethan was allowing himself to feel. And she was finally allowing herself to stay. That night, as she walked through the house before going to bed, Emma stopped in the hallway and looked at the old paintings hanging on the wall. The Walker mansion had always seemed like a dark place, full of ghosts from the past. But now, she saw something different. She saw life. She saw hope. Gently touching her belly, she whispered to herself, "We are where we are supposed to be." For the first time, she didn't doubt it. Over the next few days, Emma felt like a new chapter was beginning. The routine at the mansion no longer felt like a cycle of loneliness and pain, but rather of growth and rebuilding. Noah was putting in more effort in his physical therapy, and Ethan made sure to be there for every step of the way. Father and son were finding a way back to each other. And Emma, she finally felt like she was part of something bigger than just a job opportunity. One afternoon, while they were in the garden, Noah looked at Emma and, without warning, asked, "Have you chosen a name for the baby yet?" Emma smiled, knowing that question would come at some point. "I'm still thinking." Noah rolled his eyes. "It's taking too long. If I wait for you to decide, the child will be old enough to choose his own name by now." Emma laughed. "Do you have any suggestions then?" He crossed his arms and thought for a moment. "What if it's a strong name, like something that means fighting?" Emma blinked in surprise. Noah never talked about such things. Before she could respond, Ethan had come closer, listening to their conversation. "Noah's right. This baby is already starting life with a strong mother. The name should reflect that." Emma looked at the two of them and realized something. She wasn't alone. Her son would have a family, a real one. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "I think I like that idea." For the first time, she felt like the future wasn't a scary uncertainty, but a path full of possibilities. That night, before bed, Ethan appeared at Emma's bedroom door. "May I?" She nodded, and he stepped inside, hesitantly. "I just wanted to say that no matter what happens, I'm here. For you, for the baby, for everything." Emma felt her heart race. He wasn't promising a perfect future, but he was making it clear that he wasn't going anywhere. And that, for her, was more than enough. As she lay down to sleep, Emma realized that her journey to this point had been full of obstacles, but now she no longer saw her story as one of pain and loss. She saw it as proof that there was always a way back, a second chance, a new beginning. The Walker mansion, which had once seemed like a place of solitude, was now a home. And for the first time in a long time, Emma fell asleep with a smile on her face. She had found her place in the world. Did you like this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like it, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any news. Oh, and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching this video from? I want to know how far our message is reaching.